The crystal champagne glass shattered against the marble floor just as the baby kicked. Charlotte Hayes pressed her trembling fingers against her 7-month belly, the sound echoing through the Metropolitan Arts Center's ornate ballroom like a gunshot. 300 of the city's elite turned to stare, their conversations dying mid-sentence. The baby kicked just as Richard's hand struck her cheek, she would tell herself later, trying to make sense of the moment that changed everything. Richard Hayes adjusted his black tie jacket with practiced calm, his voice dropping to that controlled whisper she'd learned to fear. "Smile, Charlotte. Everyone's watching." His grip on her elbow tightened as photographers captured what would look like an intimate moment between the city's golden couple, the tech millionaire, and his pregnant wife at their annual charity auction appearance. Charlotte forced her practiced society smile, the same one she'd perfected during 3 years of marriage to her millionaire husband. Her emerald gown, specially tailored to elegantly showcase her pregnancy, now felt like a costume in a play she never auditioned for. The fabric clung to her swollen belly, advertising the air that had supposedly secured her position in Richard's world. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our annual Children's Hospital fundraiser," announced Walter Davidson from the podium, his voice carrying over the murmur of recovery. "Tonight, we'll raise funds for the new pediatric wing that will serve families throughout our community." Charlotte's hand instinctively moved to her cheek where Richard's ring had left a slight mark. The baby kicked again, more insistently this time, as if sensing her distress through the wall of her womb. She'd read that babies could feel their mother's stress hormones, and tonight her body was flooded with them. The ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the glitter of diamonds at every throat. These were Richard's people, the tech elite, old money families, and social climbers who measured worth in portfolio values and property locations. Charlotte had once felt honored to be included in their ranks. Now she felt like an imposter wearing someone else's life. "Mrs. Hayes, you look absolutely radiant," gushed Patricia Wellington, approaching with her husband in tow. "Pregnancy suits you beautifully." "Thank you," Charlotte managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "We're very excited about the baby." Richard's hand found the small of her back, a gesture that appeared supportive but felt possessive. "Charlotte's been reading every parenting book she can find. Very thorough. My wife." The patronizing tone made Charlotte's stomach clench. Very thorough, as if her preparation for motherhood was a hobby rather than the most important thing she'd ever done. As if her intelligence was something to be managed rather than celebrated. "When are you due?" Patricia asked. 8 weeks, Charlotte replied, then caught herself. "Well, 7 weeks and 4 days. Richard chuckled indulgently. "She counts every day. I keep telling her babies come when they're ready, not when we plan for them." Charlotte bit back her response. She counted every day because each one brought her closer to becoming responsible for another human being. Each day mattered when you were preparing to protect someone completely dependent on you. But explaining that would only earn her another lecture about pregnancy hormones making women overly emotional. That's when she saw him across the crowded room, and her carefully constructed world began to crumble. Tyler Morrison stood near the silent auction tables, his familiar brown eyes meeting hers across 20 feet in 8 years of separation. He wore confidence differently, now earned rather than inherited. The shy college boy she'd loved had become a man who commanded attention without demanding it. His dark hair was shorter now, touched with silver at the temples that made him look distinguished rather than old. The nervous energy that used to make him fidget during finals week had been replaced by the steady calm of someone who'd found his place in the world. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. Tyler. Here. Tonight. The universe's sense of timing had always been questionable, but this felt particularly cruel. Richard followed her gaze and his jaw tightened like a steel trap. Of all the charity events in this city, Morrison had to choose ours. "You know him," Charlotte kept her voice carefully neutral, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "Investment banker. Morrison Financial. He's been making waves in the tech acquisition space." Richard's tone carried the grudging respect one successful man afforded another. Aggressive negotiator. Takes what he wants without apology. Charlotte almost laughed at the irony. If Richard only knew that Tyler Morrison had once been the gentlest soul she'd ever known. The man who'd held her while she cried over failed organic chemistry exams. Who'd driven 4 hours to surprise her on her birthday with her favorite coffee from their old campus hangout. who'd respected her enough to let her go when she chose Richard's financial security over their uncertain future. The baby kicked again, and Charlotte wondered if children could sense their mother's regrets through the amniotic fluid. "Charlotte, darling, you look pale." Dorothy Hayes materialized beside them like a disapproving specter in Chanel. Richard's mother had perfected the art of sounding concerned while delivering criticism. "Perhaps you should sit down. Pregnant women shouldn't overtax themselves at public events." "I'm fine. Dorothy, just warm in here. It's the hormones, dear. They make women overheated and emotional." "Richard, perhaps Charlotte should go home early tonight." Charlotte's hands clenched into fists at her sides. The narcissistic abuse had become so normalized in Richard's family that Dorothy dispensed it like dinner conversation. Every suggestion was really a command. Every expression of concern was really a criticism. Every piece of advice was really a way to maintain control. "I'm staying for the entire auction," Charlotte said firmly. "It's for the children's hospital. This is important." Richard's smile never wavered, but his voice carried a warning. "Of course, darling. Whatever makes you happy." Whatever makes you happy. The phrase that meant exactly the opposite in Richard's vocabulary. He'd say it right before explaining why her happiness was impractical, expensive, or inappropriate for someone in her position. Someone married to a millionaire husband with a reputation to maintain. Tyler had moved closer during their conversation, now standing just one table away, close enough that Charlotte could see the small scar above his left eyebrow from the time he'd walked into a tree branch while reading a biology textbook. Close enough to notice that he still wore his father's vintage watch, despite clearly having the means to afford something more expensive. Their eyes met again, and Tyler's expression softened with something that looked like sympathy. Not pity. Tyler had never pitied anyone, but genuine concern. The same look he'd given her during senior year when she'd been stressed about graduate school applications and her parents' divorce proceedings. "Shall we find our table?" Richard's hand pressed against her back, steering her away from Tyler's section of the room. "The auction starts soon, and I want to review the catalog one more time." As they walked toward their assigned table near the front of the ballroom, Charlotte caught a glimpse of Tyler watching her retreat. His expression was unreadable now, but something in his posture suggested he was calculating more than just auction bid amounts. The baby kicked again, and Charlotte placed both hands over her belly, whispering a silent promise. "Whatever happens tonight, little one, I'll make sure you grow up knowing your worth isn't determined by someone else's approval." She just hoped she'd remember how to value herself the same way. Charlotte excused herself to the ladies' room, her heart racing from more than pregnancy hormones. The ornate powder room off the main ballroom felt like a sanctuary, all marble surfaces and soft lighting that forgave the dark circles under her eyes. In the gilt-framed mirror, she studied the faint red mark on her cheek and wondered how many of the 300 guests had noticed it. The bathroom door opened with a gentle whoosh, and Margaret Thompson entered, her silver dress rustling against the marble floor. Maggie had been Charlotte's closest friend since college, the one person who'd known her before Richard, before the millionaire husband transformed her from Charlotte Mitchell into Charlotte Hayes. "Honey, are you okay?" Maggie's reflection appeared beside Charlotte's in the mirror, her warm brown eyes filled with concern. Half the room saw what happened out there. Charlotte's hands trembled as she reapplied her lipstick, trying to restore the perfect society wife mask. "It was nothing. Richard's just stressed about the quarterly reports. The tech sector's been volatile." "That wasn't stress, Charlotte. That was control." Maggie's voice dropped to a whisper as another woman entered a nearby stall. "And Tyler Morrison is out there asking questions about you." Charlotte's lipstick tube clattered into the marble sink. "He's asking what kind of questions? The kind that suggest he still cares about your welfare." Maggie retrieved the lipstick and handed it back. "How long has it been since someone asked about you instead of asking about Richard's wife?" The question hit harder than Charlotte expected. When was the last time someone had been interested in her thoughts, her feelings, her dreams beyond her function as Richard's spouse and the mother of his heir? The narcissistic abuse had been so gradual, so carefully disguised as protection and guidance, that she'd almost forgotten she used to be a person with her own opinions and aspirations. "Maggie, what did you tell Tyler about my marriage?" "Nothing he couldn't see for himself." Maggie's reflection met Charlotte's eyes in the mirror. "But maybe it's time someone reminded you of who you used to be." They returned to the ballroom where the crowd had settled into their assigned seats. Charlotte spotted Tyler near the bar, and for a moment their eyes met across the room. He raised his glass slightly in what might have been a greeting or a salute. The gesture was so subtle that anyone watching would assume he was simply adjusting his drink. Then Tyler did something unexpected. He approached their table with 2 glasses of sparkling cider, weaving through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone who belonged in these circles but hadn't forgotten where he came from. Charlotte, his voice was exactly as she remembered, warm, steady, completely without pretense. I brought you some cider. Figured you might want something alcohol-free. He offered her the glass without making it obvious to the entire table that he was accommodating her pregnancy. The thoughtfulness of it nearly brought tears to her eyes. Richard would have made a production of ordering her a special drink, announcing to everyone within earshot that his pregnant wife needed special consideration. Tyler simply provided what she needed without fanfare. Thank you, she managed, accepting the glass. Richard appeared beside them with the precision of a guided missile. Morrison? His voice carried the chill of a January morning. Hayes. Tyler's smile never wavered. Congratulations on the pregnancy. When are you due? 8 weeks, Charlotte answered before Richard could speak. How wonderful. Children are such blessings. Tyler's eyes held warmth that Richard's never had, even in their early dating days. I imagine you're both very excited. Dorothy Hayes materialized on Richard's other side like backup arriving at a crime scene. Mr. Morrison, isn't it I believe I knew your mother? Lovely woman. Such a shame about your father's business troubles. Charlotte watched Tyler's expression remain pleasantly neutral, despite Dorothy's obvious attempt to establish social hierarchy. The Morrison family had indeed faced financial difficulties when Tyler was in high school, but he'd worked his way through college and built his investment firm from nothing. His success was earned, not inherited. My father taught me that setbacks are just setups for comebacks, Tyler replied smoothly. Morrison Financial has done quite well for itself. Oh yes, I'm sure. Dorothy's tone suggested she was anything but sure. These new money success stories are so inspiring. The insult was delivered with such practiced elegance that anyone overhearing might think it was a compliment. This was how Richard's family operated, with verbal precision strikes designed to wound while maintaining plausible deniability. Walter Davidson approached the podium, tapping his microphone to signal the evening's transition from cocktails to auction. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll take your seats, we're ready to begin tonight's fundraising auction. Tyler stepped back from their table. Enjoy the evening. May the best causes win. As he walked away, Charlotte noticed he moved with the controlled grace of someone who'd learned to navigate hostile territory. The shy college boy she'd known had developed armor, but unlike Richard's armor of aggression and dominance, Tyler's seemed designed to protect rather than attack. Presumptuous man, Dorothy sniffed as they settled into their chairs. Acting as if he belongs at our table? He was being polite. Mother, Richard said. Though his tone suggested he agreed with Dorothy's assessment, Charlotte sipped her cider and watched Tyler take his seat 3 tables away. He'd positioned himself with a clear view of the auction podium and an equally clear view of her table. Whether that was intentional or coincidental, she couldn't tell. The first auction item was announced, and Charlotte felt the energy in the room shift from social pleasantries to competitive focus. These people didn't just attend charity auctions to support good causes, they attended to display their wealth, to establish their position in the social hierarchy, to prove their superiority over their peers. Our first item tonight is a week in the Hamptons cottage, donated by the Davidson family, Walter announced from the podium. This charming waterfront property offers privacy, luxury, and access to some of the East Coast's most exclusive beaches. Bidding starts at $5,000. Richard leaned forward in his chair, his paddle ready. Charlotte had seen him in acquisition mode before: the focused intensity, the calculated aggression, the absolute determination to win. In business, these qualities had made him incredibly successful. In marriage, they made him impossible to live with. That was just the beginning. The next few hours would reveal exactly how far Tyler Morrison was willing to go to protect her. Tyler raised his paddle with a smile that promised war. Our first item tonight is a week in the Hamptons cottage, donated by the Davidson family, Walter announced, his auctioneer's voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's acoustics. Bidding starts at $5,000. Richard's paddle shot up immediately. 10,000. Charlotte had seen her millionaire husband bid at charity auctions before, but never with this kind of aggressive opening. Usually he waited, calculated, made strategic moves designed to intimidate other bidders without overpaying. Tonight felt different. Tyler's paddle rose smoothly. 15,000. A murmur rippled through the crowd. 15,000 for a week-long vacation rental was already approaching the property's actual market value, and they were just getting started. Richard's neck reddened above his crisp white collar. 20,000. 25,000. Tyler countered without hesitation, his tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. Charlotte felt the energy in the room shift as other attendees sensed drama brewing. The Hamptons cottage had been expected to sell for perhaps $12,000. These two men were already driving the price beyond reason, and everyone knew it wasn't about vacation homes anymore. 30,000, Richard declared, his voice carrying an edge that Charlotte recognized as dangerous. 35,000. Tyler's response came so quickly it almost overlapped Richard's bid. Dorothy Hayes leaned toward Charlotte. What's happening here? This is becoming unseemly. I don't know, Charlotte whispered, though pieces were starting to form a pattern in her mind. Tyler wasn't bidding randomly. He was methodically countering everything Richard wanted, driving prices up with surgical precision. $40,000, Richard called out, his voice now carrying through the ballroom. Tyler paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough for Richard to think he'd won. Then, with a slight smile, he raised his paddle. $50,000. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Other potential bidders had long since dropped out, recognizing this wasn't about vacation cottages anymore. This was about something much more personal and much more expensive. Judith Patterson, the society reporter for the city's premier lifestyle magazine, frantically scribbled notes while her photographer captured every moment. Charlotte could already imagine tomorrow's headline: Millionaire bidding war erupts at Children's Hospital charity auction. Richard stood halfway up in his chair. $75,000. The amount was ridiculous, more than many people made in a year, spent on a week at a beach house. Charlotte placed her hand on Richard's arm, trying to calm him down, but he shook her off with barely concealed irritation. Tyler's smile never wavered. $100,000. The ballroom fell completely silent. Walter Davidson's gavel hovered in the air as he waited for any additional bids. But everyone knew the contest was over. No vacation rental was worth that amount of money. Going once, going twice, Walter's voice carried across the silent crowd. Sold to paddle number 47 for $100,000. Applause erupted, but it carried an undertone of shocked excitement. This was the kind of drama these people would discuss at dinner parties for months. Tyler nodded graciously to the auctioneer, as if he'd just purchased a cup of coffee rather than spending more than most people's annual salaries on a vacation rental. When his eyes met Charlotte's across the room, she saw something that made her breath catch, not triumph, but concern, as if the money meant nothing compared to whatever message he was trying to send. Richard slumped back in his chair, his face an alarming shade of purple. That son of a bitch. Richard, Dorothy hissed. Language. He just cost me $100,000 for spite. Actually, Charlotte said quietly, he cost himself $100,000. You didn't lose anything. Richard's glare could have melted steel. Don't be naive, Charlotte. This was about humiliation, not vacation homes. Walter Davidson had moved on to the next item while Richard steamed in his chair. Our second offering tonight is a wine collection from the private cellar of renowned vintner, Marcus Chen. This collection includes bottles dating back 30 years, some of which are no longer in production. Charlotte watched her husband's face carefully. She'd seen Richard's private notes about tonight's auction, seen him circle items in the catalog. The wine collection had been marked with 3 stars, his highest priority rating. Bidding opens at $8,000. Richard's paddle went up immediately. $15,000. Tyler didn't even pause. $20,000. And so it began again. The same pattern, the same escalating tension, the same feeling that Charlotte was watching something much larger than a charity auction unfold before her eyes. $25,000, Richard called out, his voice tight. $30,000, Tyler responded. Charlotte found herself studying Tyler's face across the room. He looked completely relaxed, as if he had unlimited funds and unlimited time to spend them. But more than that, he looked like he was enjoying himself. Not in a cruel way, but with the satisfaction of someone executing a carefully planned strategy. $40,000, Richard announced, standing slightly to make sure his bid was seen. 50,000, Tyler countered immediately. Dorothy gripped Charlotte's arm. This is madness. Someone needs to stop this. But Charlotte was beginning to understand that this wasn't madness at all. This was chess, played with auction paddles and charity fundraising. Tyler was systematically targeting every item Richard wanted, driving up prices not out of spite, but out of some deeper motivation she was only beginning to grasp. $60,000, Richard shouted, his composure completely gone now. Tyler's pause was longer this time. He appeared to consider his options, consulting what looked like notes in his auction catalog. Then he smiled and raised his paddle. $75,000. Walter's gavel fell for the second time. Sold to paddle number 47. The crowd's murmur was louder now, excited and speculative. 2 items. 2 victories for Tyler Morrison. 2 humiliating defeats for Richard Hayes. The math was starting to look less like coincidence and more like strategy. That's when Charlotte realized the terrible truth about her marriage and why Tyler Morrison was really there. Richard turned to her with fury blazing in his eyes. Did you tell Morrison what items I wanted? Of course not, Charlotte protested. How would I even? You've been planning this. Richard's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper again. You and Morrison, laughing at me behind my back. Richard, you're being paranoid. I haven't spoken to Tyler in 8 years. But even as she said it, Charlotte realized Richard might not be entirely wrong. Not about her conspiring with Tyler, that was impossible, but about Tyler's knowledge of Richard's preferences. Someone had told Tyler exactly which items her millionaire husband valued most. Someone who knew Richard's patterns, his pride points, his vulnerabilities. Someone who'd been watching both of them very carefully. Charlotte's eyes found Maggie across the room, and her best friend's slight nod confirmed what Charlotte was beginning to suspect. This wasn't coincidence. This was intervention, disguised as charity auction drama. And Tyler Morrison was just getting started. Next, we have a stunning diamond necklace from Cartier, valued at $30,000. Walter continued, his voice maintaining professional composure, despite the obvious tension filling the ballroom. This exquisite piece features 18 carats of brilliant cut diamonds in a classic tennis setting. Charlotte's breath caught. She'd admired that necklace in the catalog, mentioning it to Richard just that morning over breakfast. He'd dismissed it as unnecessary extravagance for someone in your condition, suggesting that pregnant women had no business wearing expensive jewelry. The narcissistic abuse was always delivered as practical advice. Richard never said, "You don't deserve beautiful things." Instead, he'd frame his control as concern for her welfare or guidance about appropriate behavior for someone married to a millionaire husband with a public image to maintain. Richard's paddle shot up immediately. 35,000. 40,000, Tyler responded before the auctioneer could even acknowledge Richard's bid. Charlotte watched her husband's face cycle through emotions: surprise, anger, and something that looked almost like panic. This wasn't business competition anymore. This was personal warfare conducted through charitable donations. How does he know? Richard muttered, his grip on Charlotte's hand becoming painful. Every item I've marked in the catalog, every piece you've mentioned wanting. Charlotte's pulse quickened. Know what? Every single thing I've prioritized tonight? Richard's eyes narrowed as he studied Tyler across the room. Someone fed him information. The bidding war continued with increasing intensity. Richard bid 50,000. Tyler countered with 60,000. The necklace's appraised value became irrelevant as pride and territory took precedence over financial sense. $75,000, Richard announced, his voice carrying through the now silent ballroom. Tyler paused, appearing to consult his notes again. Charlotte found herself holding her breath, wondering if this would be the item where Tyler finally backed down. The amounts being discussed were staggering, even for people with substantial wealth. $85,000, Tyler called out, his voice calm and steady. Richard's hand tightened on Charlotte's wrist until she had to bite her lip to keep from wincing. $100,000. $100,000 for a $30,000 necklace. Charlotte thought about all the children who could be helped with that amount of money, all the medical equipment that could be purchased for the hospital they were supposedly supporting. Tyler smiled and raised his paddle one final time. $125,000. Walter's gavel fell with finality. Sold to paddle number 47. The applause was scattered now, more nervous than celebratory. People were beginning to whisper among themselves, speculating about the obvious animosity between the two bidders and wondering how far this public confrontation might escalate. Dorothy Hayes materialized beside their table like a storm cloud gathering momentum. "Richard, control yourself. This display is unseemly." "Mother, stay out of this. That young man is making you look foolish," Dorothy hissed, her voice carrying further than she intended. "And your wife is enjoying every moment of it." Charlotte's face burned with embarrassment and anger. "I'm not enjoying anything about this evening." "Aren't you?" Dorothy's gaze was sharp as broken glass. "Your old boyfriend humiliating your husband in front of 300 witnesses? I'd say you're getting exactly what you wanted." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Charlotte had grown accustomed to Dorothy's subtle criticisms and passive-aggressive comments. But this was different. This was a direct attack on her loyalty and character, delivered in front of their entire social circle. "I didn't know Tyler would be here tonight," Charlotte said quietly. "I haven't spoken to him in 8 years." "But you wanted to," Dorothy replied with cruel satisfaction. "Any fool can see that." Walter had moved on to the next auction item while their family drama played out in whispered arguments. "Our fourth offering tonight is a collection of vintage wines from the Bordeaux region, including several bottles from exceptional years." Richard's notes had marked this collection with 2 stars. Not his highest priority, but definitely something he'd wanted to acquire. Charlotte watched him study Tyler across the room, trying to calculate whether continuing this bidding war was worth the financial and social cost. Bidding opens at $12,000. Richard hesitated for just a moment before raising his paddle. $15,000. Tyler's response was immediate. $20,000. $25,000. Richard countered, but his voice lacked the aggressive confidence of earlier bids. $30,000. Tyler called out. Charlotte could see her husband's internal struggle playing out across his face. His pride demanded that he continue fighting, but his business instincts were warning him about the escalating costs. Each bid was making him look more desperate and less in control. $35,000, Richard announced, but even Charlotte could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. Tyler appeared to consider this bid more carefully than the others. He consulted his notes, looked toward Charlotte's table, then raised his paddle with what looked like reluctance. $40,000. The gavel fell again. Sold to paddle number 47. 4 items, 4 victories for Tyler Morrison, 4 increasingly expensive defeats for Richard Hayes. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore, and the ballroom's atmosphere had shifted from festive charity auction to gladiatorial combat. Judith Patterson had moved closer to their table, her photographer capturing every expression and gesture. Tomorrow's society pages would feature this confrontation prominently, complete with speculation about the relationship between Charlotte Hayes and Tyler Morrison. "People are staring," Charlotte whispered to Richard. "Let them stare," he replied through gritted teeth. "Morrison thinks he can humiliate me in front of my own peers. He's about to learn otherwise." But Charlotte was beginning to wonder if humiliation was really Tyler's goal. Each time he won an item, he looked not triumphant, but concerned. His eyes kept finding hers across the room, and his expression suggested he was trying to communicate something she couldn't quite understand. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, responding to her elevated stress levels. Charlotte placed both hands on her belly, trying to calm herself for the sake of her unborn child. Whatever was happening between Tyler and Richard, she couldn't let it affect her pregnancy or endanger her baby's health. The next item up for auction would change everything. Walter Davidson approached the podium with a manila folder, consulting his notes before making the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special addition to tonight's catalog, a last-minute donation that I think you'll find particularly exciting." Charlotte felt a chill run down her spine. Special editions were unusual at these carefully planned events. Whatever was coming next hadn't been in the catalog Richard had studied and marked with his preferences, which meant Tyler couldn't possibly know if this was something Richard wanted, unless Tyler himself had arranged for this special edition to be included. Our special edition tonight is a painting by emerging artist Sarah Chen, Walter announced, consulting the manila folder with obvious pleasure. This stunning landscape depicts the Hudson Valley in autumn, and Ms. Chen has graciously agreed to donate it to benefit the Children's Hospital. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. She remembered standing in front of a similar painting at a gallery opening just 6 months ago, mesmerized by the artist's use of light and color. She'd mentioned to Richard how much she loved the piece, how it reminded her of childhood trips to her grandmother's house in upstate New York. Richard had dismissed her interest immediately. "We have enough art," he'd said. "Our walls are full, and your taste tends toward the sentimental rather than the valuable." The narcissistic abuse was always delivered as education about her shortcomings. Richard never said, "I don't want you to have things you enjoy." Instead, he'd explain why her preferences were wrong, unsophisticated, or impractical for people in their social position. Now, as Walter displayed the painting on an easel beside the podium, Charlotte felt tears sting her eyes. The landscape was beautiful rolling hills painted in shades of gold and crimson, with light streaming through autumn trees in a way that made her homesick for places she'd never lived. Bidding opens at $5,000. Richard didn't move. The painting wasn't in his catalog, wasn't part of his predetermined acquisition strategy. But Charlotte found herself raising her paddle before she could think about the consequences. $5,000, she called out, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. Richard's head snapped toward her in shock. "Charlotte, what are you doing?" "I like it," she said simply. "It's beautiful. We discussed this. You don't have the eye for art investment." "I'm not bidding for investment. I'm bidding because I want it." Tyler's paddle went up immediately. $10,000. Charlotte felt a surge of defiance that surprised her with its intensity. For 3 years, she'd allowed Richard to make every decision about their home, their social calendar, their future. She'd accepted his criticism of her taste, his dismissal of her preferences, his control over every aspect of their shared life. But tonight, in front of 300 witnesses, she was going to bid on something she wanted simply because she wanted it. $15,000, she announced. Raising her paddle again, Richard grabbed her wrist. "Charlotte, stop this immediately." $20,000, Tyler called out, his eyes fixed on Charlotte with something that looked like admiration. "I said stop." Richard's grip tightened until Charlotte had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. "You're hurting me," she whispered. $25,000, Charlotte announced, pulling her wrist free from Richard's grasp. The ballroom had gone completely silent. Everyone could see the conflict playing out at the Hayes table, could witness the rare spectacle of a society wife defying her millionaire husband in public. $30,000, Tyler countered, but his bid sounded reluctant, as if he was continuing only to support Charlotte's rebellion. Dorothy Hayes stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the marble floor. "This is unacceptable behavior. Charlotte, you will stop this nonsense immediately." $35,000, Charlotte replied, her voice growing stronger with each bid. Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. "You're embarrassing our family." "No," Charlotte said quietly. "You're embarrassing our family. I'm just trying to buy a painting I like." $40,000, and Tyler called out. Charlotte hesitated. 40,000 was an enormous amount of money to spend on artwork by an unknown artist. But it wasn't about the money anymore, was it? It was about her right to want something, to express a preference, to make a choice about her own environment. $45,000, she announced. "That's enough." Richard's shout carried through the ballroom's perfect acoustics. "Charlotte, you will put that paddle down right now." The room fell into shocked silence. 300 people watched as Richard Hayes publicly commanded his pregnant wife like she was a disobedient child, rather than an equal partner in their marriage. Tyler's voice cut through the silence like a blade. $50,000. His bid wasn't about the painting anymore. It was about giving Charlotte a way out of the public confrontation, allowing her to lose the bidding war gracefully, rather than continue defying her husband in front of their entire social circle. Walter's gavel hung suspended in the air as he waited for any additional bids. Charlotte's paddle remained in her lap, her rebellion ended by Tyler's kindness rather than Richard's commands. Going once, going twice. sold to paddle number 47 for $50,000. Applause erupted, but it sounded forced and uncomfortable. Everyone had witnessed something that felt too private for public consumption, a marriage's power dynamics laid bare for all to see. Richard stood up so abruptly that his chair toppled backward. "We're leaving. Now." "The auction isn't over," Charlotte protested. "It is for us." Richard's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "Get your coat." Charlotte remained seated, her hands folded over her pregnant belly. "No." The single word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Richard's shocked expression suggested he'd never heard his wife refuse a direct command before. "Excuse me, I said no." "Richard, I'm not leaving." "People are watching," Dorothy hissed. "Think about your reputation." "I am thinking about my reputation," Charlotte replied. "I'm thinking about what kind of woman I want people to see when they look at me." Tyler had approached their table during the confrontation, moving with the careful precision of someone entering a volatile situation. "Is everything all right here?" "Everything's fine," Richard snapped. "This is a private family matter." "It stopped being private when you started shouting at your pregnant wife in front of 300 people," Tyler replied calmly. "Don't you dare tell me how to treat my wife. Someone should, since you clearly don't know how." The insult hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Richard's hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a moment Charlotte thought he might actually swing at Tyler in front of the entire ballroom. "Gentlemen," Walter Davidson appeared with 2 security guards flanking him. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere more private." "There's nothing to discuss," Richard declared. "Morrison has been systematically targeting every item I wanted tonight, driving up prices out of spite." "I've been supporting a children's hospital charity," Tyler replied. "If that threatens you, perhaps you should examine your priorities." What happened next shocked everyone, including Charlotte herself. Richard raised his hand toward Charlotte again, his rage finally overriding his concern for public appearances. But this time, instead of flinching or making excuses, Charlotte stood up to meet his approach. "Don't," she said clearly. "Don't you dare." The words carried through the ballroom's acoustics, reaching every corner of the room. Judith Patterson's photographer captured the moment Charlotte Hayes, 7 months pregnant, standing up to her millionaire husband while 300 witnesses watched in stunned silence. For the first time in 3 years of marriage, Charlotte felt like herself again. Tyler stepped forward with the fluid motion of someone who'd made his decision. "Hayes, I think you need to calm down." "Don't tell me what I need," Richard snarled, his composure completely shattered now. "This is between my wife and me." "Not anymore, it isn't." Tyler's voice remained steady, but Charlotte could see tension in his shoulders, the controlled readiness of someone prepared for physical confrontation. "Not when you're threatening a pregnant woman in public." The word threatening rippled through the crowd like electricity. People began pulling out phones, recording what was clearly becoming a major social scandal. By tomorrow morning, this confrontation would be all over social media and the society pages. Dorothy Hayes grabbed Charlotte's arm with surprising strength. "Sit down this instant. You're making a spectacle of yourself." "I'm standing up for myself," Charlotte replied, pulling free from her mother-in-law's grip. "There's a difference." Richard's face had moved beyond purple into an alarming red that made Charlotte worry about his blood pressure. "Morrison, you have no right to interfere in my marriage." "I have every right to intervene when I see someone being mistreated," Tyler replied. "Especially someone I care about." The admission sent a shockwave through the crowd. Caring about another man's wife was the kind of statement that ended careers and destroyed reputations in their social circle. "You care about her," Richard's voice rose to a near shout. "She's my wife, the mother of my child." "Marriage isn't ownership," Tyler said quietly. "And fatherhood isn't a license to be abusive." The word abusive hung in the air like an accusation. Charlotte saw people leaning forward in their seats, straining to hear every word of the confrontation. This would be the most talked about charity auction in the city's history. "Abusive," Richard laughed, but the sound contained no humor. "I've given her everything. A beautiful home, financial security, a place in society. She's living a life most women would kill for." "She's living a life you chose for her," Tyler countered. "That's not the same thing as giving her everything." Charlotte felt the baby kick hard against her ribs, responding to her elevated stress levels. She placed both hands on her belly, trying to calm herself and her unborn child. Whatever was happening here, she couldn't let it endanger her pregnancy. "Richard," she said quietly, her voice somehow carrying through the tension. "Please, people are watching. Our baby. Our baby," Richard turned his fury on her. "Our baby, who you're putting at risk with this emotional outburst. Our baby, who you're embarrassing with this public display." The blame landed exactly where Charlotte expected it to, squarely on her shoulders. In Richard's world, she was responsible for his behavior as well as her own. If he lost control, it was because she'd provoked him. If he became abusive, it was because she'd failed to manage his emotions properly. The narcissistic abuse was so complete, so thoroughly integrated into their relationship, that even Charlotte sometimes believed she was the problem. "Leave her alone," Tyler's voice cut through Richard's tirade. "If you want to be angry at someone, be angry at me." "Oh, I am angry at you." Richard stepped closer to Tyler, forcing the other man to back up or engage in physical confrontation. "I'm furious at you for trying to steal my wife." "I'm not trying to steal anyone," Tyler replied. "I'm trying to remind Charlotte that she deserves better than this." "Better than what? Better than being married to a millionaire husband? Better than financial security? Better than a man who can provide for her and her child? Better than being treated like property instead of a person?" The words hung in the air like a challenge. Richard's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, and Charlotte could see him calculating whether physical violence would be worth the social consequences. Walter Davidson approached with additional security, his diplomatic smile strained to the breaking point. "Gentlemen, ladies, I really must insist that we take this conversation to a private location." "There's nothing private about a man who can't control his temper," Tyler said, never taking his eyes off Richard. "Control." Richard's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You want to see control? Morrison, I'll show you control." He pulled out his phone with theatrical precision, his fingers flying over the screen. "One phone call to my lawyer, and I'll file for emergency custody of my unborn child based on Charlotte's emotional instability and inappropriate relationship with you." The threat hit Charlotte like a physical blow. Emergency custody proceedings could legally prevent her from leaving the state, could force her to submit to psychological evaluations, could paint her as an unfit mother before her child was even born. Dorothy nodded approvingly. "It's for the best, dear. Pregnancy hormones can make women quite irrational." "You can't do that," Charlotte whispered, her hands protective over her belly. "I can and I will." Richard's smile was cold and calculated. "Unless you come home right now and we present a united front to the press tomorrow. One phone call. Charlotte, that's all it takes to destroy your future with our child." Charlotte felt the familiar trap closing around her, the impossible choice between submission and punishment that defined every major decision in their marriage. Submit to Richard's control or face legal consequences that could separate her from her baby. Tyler stepped between them. "Hayes, that's enough." "Is it, Morrison? Because from where I stand, you've been interfering in my marriage all evening, deliberately bidding against me, encouraging my wife's defiance, undermining my authority in front of our peers." "Your authority?" Tyler's voice carried a dangerous edge now. "Over another human being? Over my wife and my unborn child? Yes." The possessive language made Charlotte's skin crawl. "My wife, my child." As if she and the baby were objects to be owned rather than people to be loved. That's when Charlotte realized she'd reached her breaking point. "Stop," she said quietly. Both men turned toward her, but Charlotte's eyes were fixed on her husband. "Stop talking about me like I'm not here. Stop making decisions about my life without asking what I want. Stop treating me like I'm your property instead of your partner." Richard's expression shifted from anger to something that looked almost like panic. "Charlotte, you're being emotional. Pregnancy hormones. Don't you dare blame this on hormones." Charlotte's voice grew stronger with each word. "Don't you dare suggest that my objection to being controlled and threatened is just chemistry." The baby kicked hard, as if agreeing with her mother's rebellion. Charlotte smiled through her tears, feeling stronger than she had in months. "I'm not being emotional. Richard, I'm being human." The ballroom had transformed from a charity auction into an amphitheater for the most public marital confrontation in the city's recent memory. 300 guests sat transfixed as Charlotte Hayes faced down her millionaire husband, with a clarity that surprised everyone, including herself. "You want to call your lawyer?" Charlotte's voice carried clearly through the silence. "Go ahead. Call him." Richard's confident expression flickered with uncertainty. "Charlotte, you don't mean that. I've never meant anything more in my life." She pulled off her wedding ring, the enormous diamond catching the chandelier light one last time. "You want to threaten me with custody proceedings? Do it, but do it knowing that every person in this room has witnessed you publicly humiliating your pregnant wife." Judith Patterson's photographer continued capturing every moment, documenting what would become one of the most talked about society scandals in recent memory. Charlotte was aware of the cameras, aware of the consequences, but for the first time in 3 years, she didn't care about controlling the narrative. "Think about what you're saying." Dorothy Hayes stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of old money and older prejudices. "Think about your child's future. Think about the scandal." "I am thinking about my child's future," Charlotte replied. "I'm thinking about what kind of world I want to bring her into, what kind of marriage I want her to see as normal." "Her," Richard's voice cracked slightly. Charlotte's hand moved protectively to her belly. "Yes, her, your daughter, who I will not allow to grow up thinking that love comes with conditions and protection requires absolute submission." Tyler had remained silent during the exchange, but now he stepped forward slightly. "Charlotte, whatever you decide to do, you should know that you're not alone. You have people who care about you." "Don't!" Richard turned on Tyler with renewed fury. "Don't you dare act like you're some kind of hero here. You came to this auction specifically to humiliate me." "I came to this auction," Tyler replied calmly, "because Maggie Thompson called me and said Charlotte needed to remember who she used to be." The admission sent a ripple of shock through the crowd. Charlotte turned to see Maggie standing near the back of the ballroom, tears streaming down her face, but her chin held high. "Maggie!" Charlotte's voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry, honey," Maggie called out, "but I couldn't watch you disappear anymore. I couldn't watch him destroy the amazing woman I knew in college." "You conspired against me." Richard's voice was deadly quiet. "You and Morrison planned this whole evening." "We planned nothing," Tyler interjected. "Maggie simply told me that Charlotte had lost herself in a marriage that was more about control than love. Everything that happened tonight was your choice?" "Hayes." "My choice," Richard laughed bitterly. "You systematically targeted every item I wanted. You drove up prices specifically to make me look foolish." "I bid on auction items to support a children's hospital," Tyler replied. "If that made you look foolish, perhaps you should examine why you felt threatened by charitable giving." Charlotte watched the exchange with growing clarity. Tyler hadn't come to rescue her. He'd come to remind her that she could rescue herself. The bidding wars, the strategic outmaneuvering, even his willingness to confront Richard publicly, all of it was designed to show her that she had allies, that she wasn't as powerless as she'd believed. The final auction item would provide Charlotte with the perfect metaphor for her new beginning. Walter Davidson returned to the podium, flanked by security guards who positioned themselves strategically around the room. His diplomat's smile was strained but professional as he raised his hands for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, given the intensity of this evening's proceedings, we have one final item to auction, a last-minute addition that seems particularly appropriate." He gestured toward an easel being wheeled onto the stage. On it sat a blank white canvas in a simple wooden frame. "This represents possibility," Walter announced. "A fresh start, a blank slate for someone to create their own masterpiece. All proceeds will benefit the Children's Hospital's new wing, which will provide fresh starts for countless young patients." The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Charlotte stared at the blank canvas and saw her future uncertain. Yes, but hers to create. Bidding opens at $1,000. Charlotte looked at the paddle still clutched in her hand. She was registered as an independent bidder, not as Richard's proxy. Her own name, her own financial account, her own choice. $5,000, she called out, raising her paddle for what felt like the first time in her life. Richard stared at her in shock. "Charlotte, what are you doing creating my own masterpiece?" she replied. Tyler's smile was radiant as he raised his own paddle. $10,000. $15,000. Charlotte countered, entering into the kind of playful competition she remembered from their college days, not aggressive or hostile, but joyful and supportive. 20,000, Tyler called out, his eyes twinkling with the same warmth she remembered from their undergraduate years. Other voices began joining in. Grace Sullivan, a pregnant woman Charlotte had met briefly during cocktails, raised her paddle. 25,000, for new beginnings everywhere. Margaret Thompson stepped forward from the back of the ballroom. 30,000, for friends who remind us who we really are. Soon other women throughout the room were bidding, not competing against each other, but building on each other's contributions. The price climbed steadily as the blank canvas became a symbol of shared empowerment rather than individual acquisition. $60,000, called out a woman Charlotte didn't recognize. For all the women who need reminding that they're worth more than they've been told. When Walter's gavel finally fell, the blank canvas had sold for $78,000 to a collective of women who'd spontaneously decided to support each other's fresh starts. But the real surprise came when Charlotte realized what her new beginning would actually look like. Richard's face had gone ashen as he watched his wife receive congratulations and support from women throughout the ballroom. Phone numbers were exchanged. Offers of guest rooms were made. Business cards were pressed into Charlotte's hands. "This is insane," Dorothy muttered. "Absolutely insane." Tyler approached slowly, his expression carefully neutral. "Charlotte, I want you to know tonight wasn't about winning you back. It was about reminding you that you deserve better." "I know," Charlotte replied, surprising herself with how calm she felt. "And I want you to know that I don't need a knight in shining armor, but I might need a friend." "Friends I can do," Tyler smiled. "The best relationships start there anyway." As the crowd began to disperse, Charlotte found herself surrounded by an unexpected support network. Women she'd known only casually were offering genuine assistance lawyers' names, safe places to stay, emotional support during what would undoubtedly be a difficult transition. Richard stood alone near their abandoned table, his mother beside him but no one else approaching. The man who'd seemed so powerful just hours ago now looked isolated and diminished, his authority revealed as nothing more than the willingness to intimidate those weaker than himself. Charlotte placed her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter kick with what seemed like approval. "It's going to be okay, little one," she whispered. "We're going to be just fine." For the first time in 3 years, she actually believed it. The ballroom had largely emptied, leaving behind scattered chairs, abandoned auction paddles, and the lingering tension of a public confrontation that would be discussed in society circles for years to come. Charlotte stood near the auction table, surrounded by business cards and phone numbers from women who'd spontaneously formed a support network around her moment of rebellion. Richard remained by their original table with Dorothy, his lawyer now on speakerphone, providing urgent counsel about damage control and legal strategies. The confident millionaire husband who'd entered the evening was gone, replaced by a man scrambling to maintain authority that had been revealed as illusory. "Mrs. Hayes," Grace Sullivan approached with gentle concern. "I wanted to make sure you had somewhere safe to stay tonight." The question hit Charlotte with unexpected force. In 3 years of marriage, she'd never considered that she might need somewhere other than her own home to feel safe. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. I hadn't thought that far ahead," Charlotte admitted. "You can stay with me," Maggie offered immediately. "David's out of town on business, and I have a guest room with everything you might need." Tyler, who'd been standing at a respectful distance, stepped forward. "Charlotte, you should know that whatever legal threats Richard makes, they're mostly bluster. Emergency custody requires proof of immediate danger to the child, not disagreement with your husband's authority." "How do you know that?" Charlotte asked. "Because I called my attorney 20 minutes ago," Tyler replied with a slight smile. "Turns out investment bankers need good lawyers too." Richard appeared beside them with the sudden intensity of a storm front. "Morrison, I want you to stay away from my wife. She's not property." "Hayes," Tyler replied calmly. "She can choose who she talks to. She's pregnant with my child and having some kind of emotional breakdown caused by seeing you again." Richard's voice carried the desperate edge of someone losing control of a situation he'd always dominated. Charlotte felt the familiar trap closing again, the implication that her desire for autonomy was mental instability, that her objection to being controlled was evidence of hormonal irrationality. For 3 years, she'd accepted this narrative, had genuinely wondered if her unhappiness was a character flaw rather than a reasonable response to narcissistic abuse. "I'm not having a breakdown, Richard. I'm having a breakthrough." The distinction seemed to catch Richard off guard. He'd built their entire relationship on the premise that Charlotte's emotions were unreliable, that her judgment was compromised by youth and inexperience, that she needed his guidance to navigate adult responsibilities. "Charlotte, you're 7 months pregnant. This isn't the time for dramatic life changes." "This isn't dramatic," Charlotte replied with growing confidence. "This is necessary." Dorothy approached with the predatory grace of someone sensing weakness. "Dear, think about the practicalities. Where will you live? How will you support yourself? What kind of life can you provide for your child without Richard's resources?" The questions were designed to instill fear, to make Charlotte's independence seem impossible rather than merely challenging. But they were also practical concerns that deserved honest consideration. "I'll figure it out," Charlotte said, her hand protective over her belly. "Women have been supporting themselves and their children for centuries. I have a college degree, work experience, and a brain that functions perfectly well when it's not being constantly undermined." Tyler stepped forward slightly. "Charlotte, if it helps, I know several excellent employment attorneys who specialize in discrimination cases. Being pregnant doesn't disqualify you from working, and being recently divorced doesn't make you unemployable." "Divorced?" Richard's voice cracked. "Charlotte, you can't be serious about divorce." "I'm serious about not being treated like property anymore," Charlotte replied. "If that requires divorce, then yes, I'm serious about divorce." The word hung in the air between them like a bridge burning. Richard's face cycled through emotions: shock, anger, panic, and something that might have been genuine grief. "What about our baby? What about the family we planned?" "We never planned a family. Richard, you planned an heir and I planned a child. Those aren't the same thing." The distinction was clearer to Charlotte now than it had ever been. Richard wanted a son to carry on his name and his business, a daughter to display his success in creating the perfect family. Charlotte wanted a human being to love unconditionally, to nurture into independence, to support in becoming whoever they were meant to be. "This is all Morrison's fault," Dorothy interjected. Charlotte was perfectly content until he showed up and filled her head with feminist nonsense. "I was never content," Charlotte said quietly. "I was compliant. There's a difference." Tyler remained silent, allowing Charlotte to speak for herself while making it clear through his presence that she wasn't alone. His support was steady but undemanding, the kind of alliance Charlotte had forgotten was possible. "Charlotte," Richard's voice took on the pleading tone he used when commands and threats failed. "Think about everything I've given you. The house, the lifestyle, the security. Think about what you're throwing away." "I'm not throwing anything away," Charlotte replied. "I'm choosing something different, something where my worth isn't measured by my compliance." What kind of life will you have as a single mother?" Dorothy demanded. "What kind of reputation? What kind of future?" "I don't know," Charlotte admitted, "but it will be mine to create." The honesty of it was both terrifying and exhilarating. For 3 years, Charlotte had lived according to Richard's plans, Richard's timeline, Richard's vision of their future. The unknown felt vast and dangerous, but it also felt possible in a way that her controlled existence never had. Maggie appeared with Charlotte's coat and purse. "Whenever you're ready, honey. No pressure." Charlotte looked around the ballroom one more time at the elegant decorations, the expensive art, the symbols of the life she was choosing to leave behind. Then she looked at Richard, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. "I'm not angry at you," she said softly. "I'm just done being afraid of you." Richard's expression shifted to something that might have been genuine confusion. "Afraid of me, Charlotte? I would never hurt you. You hurt me every time you told me my feelings were wrong. Every time you made decisions about my life without asking what I wanted. Every time you treated me like I was too stupid or too emotional to be trusted with my own choices." "I was protecting you," Richard protested. "I was providing for you." "You were controlling me," Charlotte replied. "And you convinced me that control was love because I didn't know the difference." She turned to Tyler. whose expression was carefully neutral despite the obvious emotions playing across his face. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not for rescuing me, but for reminding me that I could rescue myself." Tyler nodded, understanding the distinction. "You were always strong enough, Charlotte. You just needed to remember." As Charlotte walked toward the ballroom exit with Maggie, she felt her daughter kick strongly against her ribs. The baby seemed to approve of her mother's decision to choose uncertainty over safety, independence over security, possibility over predictability. "It's going to be an adventure, little one," Charlotte whispered, "for both of us." Behind her, she could hear Richard and Dorothy beginning the difficult conversation about damage control and public relations. Tomorrow there would be lawyers and financial negotiations, custody discussions, and social consequences. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Charlotte Hayes was going to sleep in a place where she was valued for who she was rather than criticized for who she wasn't. The transformation was terrifying and liberating in equal measure, and it was entirely her own choice. 6 weeks later, Charlotte sat in the law offices of Patterson, Sullivan and Associates, reviewing the final divorce settlement papers with her attorney, Janet Patterson, Judith Patterson's sister and a formidable advocate for women's rights in high-asset divorces. "The financial settlement is quite generous," Janet explained, sliding the documents across the mahogany conference table. Richard's legal team clearly wanted to avoid a protracted battle that would keep this in the public eye. Charlotte's transformation over the past month and a half had been remarkable. The pale, anxious woman from the charity auction had been replaced by someone with clear eyes and confident posture. Pregnancy had given her skin a healthy glow, but more importantly, freedom from constant criticism had given her back her voice. "The house is yours until the baby reaches 18, Janet continued. "Full custody with generous visitation rights for Richard. Child support that will ensure your daughter never wants for anything. And perhaps most importantly, no restrictions on your employment or your choice of residence." The financial independence felt surreal after 3 years of asking permission for every expenditure. Charlotte's own money, her own decisions, her own future to create however she chose. "There is one condition," Janet added carefully. "Richard insists on a clause preventing you from publicly discussing the marriage or the divorce proceedings. Standard, non-disclosure language." Charlotte considered this. The narcissistic abuse she'd endured was perfectly legal emotional manipulation. Financial control and psychological intimidation left no bruises that would show up in court. Richard's reputation would remain intact, his standing in the business community unaffected by his treatment of his wife. "I can live with that," Charlotte decided. "I don't want to be defined by what happened to me. I want to be defined by what I do next." Her phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Gallery opening tonight if you're feeling up to it. No pressure, just thought you might enjoy seeing some actual art instead of auction catalogs." Charlotte smiled. Tyler had been true to his word about friendship. He'd provided emotional support during the difficult early days of separation, helped her find good lawyers, even recommended an excellent obstetrician when she decided to switch from Richard's high society doctor to someone who treated her like a person rather than a trophy wife producing an heir. But he'd never pushed for anything more than friendship, never tried to capitalize on her vulnerability, never suggested that leaving Richard meant she needed another man to take care of her. His respect for her autonomy was a daily reminder of what healthy relationships looked like. "There's something else," Janet said, consulting her notes. "Tyler Morrison has made an interesting offer regarding the painting." "What painting?" "The Sarah Chen landscape he won at the auction. He wants to sell it to you for exactly what you bid, $45,000. He says it was always meant to be yours anyway." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. The painting had become a symbol of everything she'd wanted, but been told she couldn't have. Tyler's gesture wasn't romantic. It was a recognition of her right to own beautiful things simply because they brought her joy. "Tell him yes," Charlotte said, "and ask him if he'd like to help me hang it in the nursery." An hour later, Charlotte stood in what would become her daughter's room, watching Tyler carefully position the landscape painting where morning light would illuminate it perfectly. The house felt different now, not like Richard's showcase, but like a home where a child could grow up seeing beauty valued for its own sake. "A little to the left," Charlotte directed, one hand supporting her now 8-month belly. "Careful with the supervision," Tyler teased gently. I might start thinking you're as controlling as your ex-husband. Never, Charlotte laughed. Although I reserve the right to have opinions about art placement in my own home, the phrase still felt new and wonderful. Everything here was chosen by her, arranged according to her preferences, designed to support the life she wanted to create with her daughter. Tyler secured the painting and stepped back to admire their work. It looks perfect there. Your daughter will grow up seeing something beautiful every day. That's the idea, Charlotte said softly. I want her to know that beauty has value even when it's not practical. That wanting something lovely isn't frivolous or selfish. She'll know, Tyler said with quiet confidence. Because you'll teach her that her preferences matter, that her voice deserves to be heard, that love doesn't come with conditions. The baby kicked hard, as if agreeing with this assessment of her future. Charlotte had started thinking of these kicks as her daughter's way of participating in conversations, offering opinions about the world she'd soon enter. Tyler, Charlotte said carefully, I want you to know how grateful I am for your friendship, for everything you've done to help me remember who I am. You were always who you are, Tyler replied. Richard just convinced you to hide it for a while. Still, what you did at the auction, the way you've supported me through the divorce, it means everything. Tyler sat down in the rocking chair Charlotte had chosen for late-night feedings. Can I tell you something? The night Maggie called me, I almost didn't answer. I figured you were happy with your millionaire husband, living the life you'd chosen, and hearing about it would just remind me of what I'd lost. But you did answer, because Maggie said you needed to remember that someone once loved you exactly as you were, without trying to change or improve or manage you. Tyler's voice was gentle but honest. I'm not trying to win you back, Charlotte. I'm trying to help you win yourself back. Charlotte felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness, but from the profound relief of being understood. Mission accomplished, she said softly. Her phone rang, interrupting the moment. The caller ID showed her literary agent's number, and Charlotte's heart jumped with anticipation. Sarah, please, tell me you have good news. Tyler watched as Charlotte's expression transformed from hope to joy to amazement. Yes, Charlotte said into the phone. Yes, absolutely. When do they want to meet? After she hung up, Tyler raised an eyebrow in question. That was my agent, Charlotte explained, barely containing her excitement. The children's book manuscript I've been working on, Luna Learns to Fly Random House, wants to publish it. They're offering a 3-book deal. Charlotte, that's incredible. Tyler stood up to hug her, careful of her pregnant belly. You're going to be a published author. I'm going to be a working mother with my own career and my own income, Charlotte corrected, the full implications hitting her. My daughter will grow up watching her mother do work she loves, not just work she's allowed to do. The financial independence from Richard's settlement had given Charlotte security, but this offered something even more valuable: purpose and creative fulfillment that belonged entirely to her. What's the book about? Tyler asked. A little bat who's afraid to fly, Charlotte explained. Everyone tells her that bats are supposed to fly, that it's natural and easy, but Luna is terrified of leaving the safety of her cave, until one night when she realizes that being brave doesn't mean not being scared, it means flying anyway. Tyler's smile was radiant. That's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. As if in agreement, the baby kicked with unusual vigor. Charlotte laughed, placing both hands on her belly. I think someone approves of Mommy's career choice. The late afternoon light slanted through the nursery windows, illuminating the landscape painting in warm gold tones. The room felt complete now, not just furnished, but filled with the promise of a life built on love rather than control, creativity rather than compliance, hope rather than fear. Charlotte looked around the space where her daughter would spend her earliest days and felt a profound sense of peace. This child would grow up knowing that women could support themselves, that mothers could have dreams beyond their children, that love meant encouragement rather than limitation. She's going to be amazing, Tyler said quietly, following Charlotte's gaze around the room. Yes, Charlotte agreed, her hand protective over her belly. She is. For the first time since the charity auction that had changed everything, Charlotte felt ready for whatever came next. The unknown no longer felt terrifying, it felt full of possibility, and that possibility belonged entirely to her and her daughter to explore together. 3 months after her daughter's birth, Charlotte sat in her favorite coffee shop, laptop open, working on the second book in her Luna series, while baby Emma slept peacefully in her stroller. The domestic scene was unremarkable, a new mother juggling work and childcare. But for Charlotte, it represented a revolution. Emma Catherine Hayes had arrived 2 weeks early, as if eager to begin her life in a world where her mother's happiness wasn't considered selfish. The birth had been everything Charlotte had hoped for, supported by friends she'd chosen, in a hospital where she was treated as the primary decision-maker about her own body, with Tyler holding her hand through the difficult hours when she needed someone who believed in her strength. Richard had visited the hospital, of course. He'd held his daughter with appropriate tenderness, posed for the requisite photographs, and written the substantial check that would fund Emma's college education. But even in those first moments, Charlotte had seen the difference between biological connection and emotional investment. Richard saw Emma as his daughter, an extension of his legacy. Charlotte saw Emma as her own person, complete and perfect, exactly as she was. "Excuse me, are you Charlotte Hayes?" A young woman approached their table hesitantly. "I was at the charity auction. I'm getting divorced too, and I wanted to thank you." These encounters had become common over the past few months. Women would recognize Charlotte at the grocery store, at baby classes, at coffee shops throughout the city. The charity auction confrontation had become legendary in certain circles, not as a scandal, but as inspiration. "I hope everything is going well for you," Charlotte replied warmly. "It's terrifying," the woman admitted, "but watching you stand up to your husband that night, it reminded me that I didn't have to accept being treated badly just because I'd made the mistake of marrying someone who turned out to be controlling." After the woman left, Charlotte returned to her laptop where Luna was learning that the sky was bigger than she'd imagined from inside her cave. The metaphor wasn't subtle, but Charlotte's editor assured her that children's books could afford to be direct about important truths. Emma stirred in her stroller, making the soft sounds that meant she'd be hungry soon. Charlotte saved her work and lifted her daughter into her arms, marveling as she did every day at the fierce protectiveness that motherhood had awakened in her. "What do you think, baby girl?" Charlotte whispered as Emma latched on to nurse. Should Luna learn to navigate by starlight or by her own internal compass? Nursing had become Charlotte's thinking time. The forced stillness, the biological connection with her daughter, the quiet intimacy of providing exactly what Emma needed it all, created space for creativity that Charlotte had never experienced during her controlled marriage. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Saw the Times review of your book this morning. Congratulations on the starred review." Charlotte smiled. Tyler had kept his promise about friendship, maintaining exactly the right distance while offering exactly the right support. He sent articles about children's literature, remembered Emma's pediatrician appointments, and celebrated Charlotte's professional victories without making any romantic assumptions about their future. The friendship was healing in ways Charlotte was still discovering. Tyler's respect for her autonomy, his genuine interest in her thoughts and goals, his ability to support without controlling all of it, served as a daily reminder of what healthy relationships look like. Emma finished nursing, and Charlotte burped her gently, enjoying the weight of her daughter against her shoulder. At 3 months old, Emma was already showing signs of her own personality: curious, alert, surprisingly patient when her mother needed to finish a paragraph. "Charlotte." Another familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Grace Sullivan, the pregnant woman from the auction who'd joined the spontaneous bidding coalition for the blank canvas. "Grace, how are you? How's the baby?" "Perfect," Grace beamed, gesturing toward her stroller where a newborn slept peacefully. "Little James arrived last month. I wanted to thank you again for that night at the auction." "Thank me. You were part of what made it special." "You started something," Grace explained. "Not just the bidding thing, but the conversation. My husband and I went to couples therapy after watching what happened between you and Richard. Turned out we had some communication issues that needed addressing before the baby arrived." Charlotte felt a warm glow of satisfaction. The public confrontation that had initially embarrassed her had apparently inspired other couples to examine their own relationship dynamics. "I'm so glad everything worked out for you. Actually," Grace continued, "that's why I wanted to find you. A group of us have been meeting women who were at the auction that night, women who've been through divorces, women who just want to support each other in making positive changes. We call ourselves the Fresh Start Circle. After that blank canvas we all bid on. The invitation was tempting. Charlotte had discovered that isolation had been one of the most damaging aspects of her marriage to Richard. He'd gradually separated her from friends who might have provided perspective on his controlling behavior, leaving her dependent on his version of reality. When do you meet? Thursday evenings, rotating between our homes. Very informal, just coffee, conversation, and mutual support. This week, we're discussing whether to turn it into a more formal nonprofit organization. Emma gurgled approvingly from Charlotte's shoulder, as if encouraging her mother to accept social invitations. I'd love to join you, Charlotte decided. Emma and I both need more community in our lives. After Grace left, Charlotte returned to her laptop but found herself thinking about the ripple effects of that February evening. The charity auction had raised a record amount for the Children's Hospital, but it had also sparked conversations about women supporting women, about recognizing the signs of narcissistic abuse, about the difference between financial security and emotional safety. Her phone rang, displaying Maggie's number. How's my favorite author today? Maggie's voice was warm with affection. Working on book 2 and wondering how I got so lucky to have friends who care enough to stage interventions at charity auctions. You got lucky by being worth saving, Maggie replied firmly. Though I'll admit I was terrified that night. When Richard started shouting, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. You saved my life, Charlotte said simply. Maybe not literally, but you saved the life I was meant to live. You saved your own life. Tyler and I just reminded you that you had options. Charlotte shifted Emma to her other arm, marveling at how natural these conversations felt now. During her marriage to Richard, phone calls with friends had been monitored, limited, and often interrupted by demands for attention or complaints about her social priorities. Maggie, can I ask you something? That night when you called Tyler, how did you know he'd help? Because I remembered how he looked at you in college, Maggie replied. Not possessive or controlling, but like he couldn't believe his luck in knowing someone as amazing as you. That kind of love doesn't just disappear. We're just friends now, Charlotte said carefully. I know, and that's probably exactly what you both need right now. But Charlotte, when you're ready, if you're ever ready, Tyler Morrison is the kind of man who'll love your independence instead of trying to control it. After they hung up, Charlotte found herself considering the possibility of romantic love that enhanced rather than diminished her autonomy. The idea felt both appealing and terrifying after 3 years of marriage, where love had been conditional on compliance. Emma had fallen asleep in her arms, tiny fist curled against Charlotte's chest. Looking at her daughter's peaceful face, Charlotte felt the fierce determination that had sustained her through the divorce proceedings and the challenging early months of single motherhood. Your mama's going to teach you so many things, little one, she whispered, about choosing people who celebrate your dreams instead of limiting them, about the difference between love and control, about trusting your own voice even when other people try to convince you it's wrong. The coffee shop around them buzzed with the ordinary magic of people pursuing their own versions of happiness, students studying, friends catching up, entrepreneurs building businesses on laptops. Charlotte felt profoundly grateful to be part of this community of people creating their own stories rather than living according to someone else's script. Her laptop chimed with an email from her editor. Charlotte, the pre-orders for Luna Learns to Fly are exceeding our projections. The marketing team wants to discuss a book tour for next spring. Are you interested? A book tour? Her words, her story, her message about courage traveling across the country to reach children who might need to hear that being different was perfectly acceptable, that being scared was normal, that flying was possible even when it felt impossible. What do you think, Emma? Charlotte asked her sleeping daughter. Ready for some adventures with Mama? The baby's contented sigh seemed like enthusiastic approval. Charlotte opened her laptop and began typing a response to her editor, accepting the book tour opportunity with the confidence of someone who'd learned that the best adventures began when you chose courage over comfort. Outside the coffee shop windows, autumn was painting the city in shades of gold and crimson, the same colors that dominated the landscape painting now hanging in Emma's nursery. The seasons were changing, bringing new possibilities with each turning leaf. Charlotte thought about the blank canvas that had sold for $78,000 that memorable February evening. All those women bidding on the promise of fresh starts, the hope of creating something beautiful from nothing, the faith that empty spaces could be filled with whatever they chose to create. Her phone buzzed with another text from Tyler, saw a photo of Emma in Maggie's Instagram story. "She's beautiful. Charlotte, you both are." Charlotte smiled, typing back, "Thank you. She says to tell Uncle Tyler that she's ready for her first art gallery visit whenever you are. I know just the place. There's a new exhibit of children's book illustrations opening next month. Interested?" "Very interested. Emma and I are always ready for new experiences." The response felt like a perfect summary of her current life philosophy: open to possibility, willing to explore, confident enough to say yes to invitations that felt right and no to those that didn't. Emma stirred and opened her eyes, blinking at the world with a serious expression that never failed to make Charlotte laugh. At 3 months old, Emma already seemed to approach life with curiosity rather than fear, confidence rather than anxiety. "Hello, beautiful girl," Charlotte whispered. "Ready to go home and see what adventures tomorrow brings?" As she packed up her laptop and prepared Emma's stroller for the walk home, Charlotte reflected on how completely her definition of success had changed. 6 months ago, success had meant maintaining Richard's approval, fitting into his vision of the perfect society wife, suppressing her own dreams in service of his ambitions. Now success meant writing stories that mattered to her. Raising a daughter who would grow up knowing her worth wasn't determined by other people's opinions. Building friendships based on mutual respect rather than social convenience, and choosing daily to trust her own judgment about what kind of life she wanted to create. The Fresh Start Circle, Tyler's steady friendship, Emma's pure love, her publishing contract, the financial independence that allowed her to make choices based on her values rather than her fears. All of it had grown from that moment at the charity auction when she'd finally said no to being treated as less than she was worth. Walking home through the crisp October afternoon, Charlotte felt the deep satisfaction of someone who'd found her authentic life after years of living according to someone else's script. The future stretched ahead, unplanned and uncertain, but entirely her own to create. Emma dozed peacefully in her stroller, trusting completely in her mother's ability to navigate whatever came next. And for the first time in years, Charlotte trusted herself just as completely. The transformation was complete, but the adventure was just beginning. 3 blocks from home, Charlotte's phone rang with a call from her literary agent. "Charlotte, I have incredible news. The film rights to Luna Learns to Fly have been optioned by a major studio. They want to develop it as an animated feature." Charlotte stopped walking, Emma's stroller perfectly still on the sidewalk as the magnitude of this opportunity sank in. Her story about a little bat learning to trust her own wings was going to become a movie that could reach millions of children around the world. "They specifically mentioned that they love the book's message about courage and independence," her agent continued. "The producer said it reminded her of her own journey leaving an abusive relationship. Standing there on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, holding her sleeping daughter while learning that her creative work was going to touch lives in ways she'd never imagined. Charlotte felt the profound gratitude of someone who'd discovered that the most extraordinary life was often built from the decision to honor your own truth. "Yes," she said into the phone, her voice steady with quiet joy. "Absolutely yes." Because that, Charlotte had learned, was always the right answer when opportunities aligned with your authentic self. The blank canvas she'd bid on that transformative February evening had become exactly what she'd hoped: a masterpiece painted in shades of courage, love, and hope, with plenty of room left for whatever beautiful surprises tomorrow might bring. As Charlotte and Emma continued their walk home, the autumn sun painted everything in golden light, and the future felt as limitless as the sky Luna had finally learned to navigate with confidence and grace. The story was complete, but the best chapters were still to come.